Hello everyone, Dan 14th Prime here. Want to do a video share today with you guys on the Imaginarium Art Transformers G1 Grimlock statue. This is a large diorama style statue, heavily inspired by the original Transformers animated 1986 movie. Let's jump into the review here, and I'll start off with just a couple images of this big, enormous box there sitting in front of my 65-inch long Maji case wall section. Now this piece was very complicated to unbox and assemble, so I'm not going to go through all of that on video. But if you want to see what I'm talking about, check me out on Instagram, same handle, Dan14th Prime. If you go into my profile, I've saved down the story where I unboxed and assembled this statue. It was quite the process because all these sharkticons have many small pieces. They can be upwards of 10 pieces for each one, so it did take quite a bit of time and was complicated to assemble this thing. So now let's just jump into the fully assembled statue. Again, large statue about 26 inches deep, 24 inches long, and about 21 inches tall to the top of Wheelie's head. Now the only place in the US I've seen this statue available is Big Bad Toy Store. They list it for $2,200 shipped, and depending on where you live, you can add sales tax on top of that. And the edition size on this statue is a mere 75 worldwide. Let's start off by talking about the design of this piece. I love the design. It's very G1 inspired, particularly from that 1986 animated movie. I think they represent that scene even better here, with a real fight going on with Grimlock and Wheelie and all of these sharkticons. Now for me, I really love Imaginarium Art's take on G1 Transformers. I think it's a great balance of staying true to G1, but they still jazz it up a bit with lots of details in the sculpt and an excellent colorful paint application. Now I'll mention it here in design. Some might complain about scale. Scale is always a discussion in Transformers, and there's never a good answer. Technically, we could probably say Wheelie and the Sharkticons should be smaller compared to Grimlock, or Grimlock should just be bigger. And I get it, but within the practical constraints of needing to build a statue, wanting it to pop, wanting it to look good, not wanting to have too small of pieces on it if you make Wheelie even smaller, I think it takes away from the piece. So I'm actually really happy with how they scaled the relative sizes of all of these characters, just to give us the best overall impact visually in the statue. Now my personal challenge with the design is that they made it really a 360 statue. There's a lot going on behind on the other side of Grimlock, which I probably won't be able to get the benefit of when I put this guy on display. And my main complaint is the only bot mode Sharkticon is behind Grimlock's tail, and I won't be able to see him. So I would have preferred if they would have maybe narrowed the depth of the statue, because he's creating most of that 26 inches depth. If they would have moved him more towards Grimlock's head, flattened out the depth a bit, and just made the piece longer, it would work better from a display perspective, at least for me, because it would make the piece more purely profile and horizontal than 360 like it is now. Next, let's talk about Sculpt. Now, as I mentioned before, this design seeks to stay true to G1 Transformers. I think the Sculpt does a nice job of taking those basic animated designs and making them more modern, more realistic, more mechanical, and putting lots of good detail in there while staying true to the source material. Now what this is not is super stylized or really contemporary design that you might see with XM Studios, for example. And the difference between those two is a personal preference choice. I actually prefer something a little more true to G1. So with what they were going for, I have no complaints at all with the sculpt. I think it's actually quite good in how they bring that to life. And along with the sculpt here, I think I'll mention, separate but related, I'll talk a bit about materials. Imaginarium Art does have a reputation sometimes for using cheaper or plasticky type materials in their statues. It's a fair criticism. I've owned 3 of their statues, and yes, you have that experience of different smaller parts typically being maybe plasticky, 3D printed, however they do it. I will say I was really pleased with this statue because it is, I don't know all the materials, but it was heavy. It's probably mostly polystone. The Grimlock, all the Grimlock parts were heavy as hell. I think all of Wheelie was quite solid. It's mainly the Sharkticons, like their antenna. Those were clearly a plasticky type material. Wheelie's slingshot was a molded piece of plastic. So some of those smaller details, which would probably be either very fragile or very difficult just to make in a material other than plastic, were really the only exceptions that I could find to, what you might think of as high quality material, not that polystone's a precious metal or anything. So overall in the materials, I think this is, for Imaginarium Art, on the higher end of one of their better of being just really solid overall statue materials. And finally here, while I'm talking about these quality aspects, I'll also mention the overall fit and build of all the pieces and how they come together has been my experience with Imaginarium art. Some of the pegging and magnets, not super crisp and tight. They sometimes leave you a little worried, let's say, but I've never had an issue with anything falling off or not pegging in as it should. Things just seem to have a little bit more play than, say, like a Prime 1 statue. So if that's an engineering criticism, or maybe some of that play is helpful to their assembly and their manufacturing process, I don't know, but it's not the crispest, sturdiest build. For example, in Grimlock's legs between the body, you get a little bit of play there. And I mentioned that complicated assembly. I guess on that, I would recommend to them that they should be color coding the different pieces, not for each and every peg because there's so many parts, but for example, color code green all the parts of one sharkticon, color code orange all the parts of another, so at least you know what body, tail, arms, legs, etc. go to one versus another, because I had quite the challenge trying to sort that out. Up next here, let's talk about paint. Now, it's the paint that in my experience has always made the difference with Imaginarium art. They've been very inconsistent across their whole Transformers G1 line. If you look at, for example, how they painted their Soundwave versus how they painted their Optimus Prime, it just makes no sense. Soundwave has a very traditional color palette, fairly matte or satin type finish, whereas Optimus has this crazy metallic color palette and high gloss finish. Now, when Imaginarium art has got the color and paint right, I think those pieces are amongst the best that you can own as a Transformers collector. So I count those as the Soundwave, the Rodimus Prime, Starscream on phone. I think they've nailed those pieces, whereas they fell down on pieces like the Optimus Prime, for example, with the super high gloss finish and the weird blue in particular that they chose for Prime. So before I bought this, I spent a lot of time looking at the paint to make sure I was going to be happy with the color and the finish. And I am. I think the piece does an excellent job of just laying down a nice base silver for Grimlock. It's got what I call more like a satin eggshell, probably more like satin type finish, so there's some sheen and shine to it, but it's not super glossy. Same thing for the Sharkticons, just a nice, more towards, again, satin, I would say, grays, purples, and then they pop that more metallic, bright blue, which does look nice, and it really just accents the piece well. Your eye kind of goes to those tails and things, so I think that works really well. I love the gold on Grimlock. I think that's another great color choice, really makes it pop, and then there's all of these nice details, across Grimlock's tail and all of that, and also across all these Sharkticons. So overall, I think a very, very good paint application. Not without its complaints. I think, well, for one, Grimlock's arms, one thing I took a look at, they're like black. So I was kind of strange, like why not just make them silver, but I got over that, but maybe wouldn't have been my first preference of how to paint those arms. I think also on the Sharkticons, there's nothing wrong with the way they are, but, could they use a two-tone of gray, right? If you go to some screenshots, they could have a darker top of them and a lighter shade of gray underneath of them. They pretty much went with just one tone across the board. They still look good, but two-tone would be interesting to see. Maybe could take it to another level. I think definitely on the bot mode Sharkticon, it needs two-tone, just like the helmet and the body and the face just being the same gray. Doesn't look good. They needed to use tones there. That being said, it's behind the whole piece, as I already mentioned, and you're never going to see it much. It's way in the background, so it's a detail that would probably ever be hard to notice or see. I could also make a nit on the Sharkticon green slime blood. It looks a little toy, sort of a strange green, but again, G1 inspired, sort of toonish accurate, so I get it. And again, it's on the bottom and back of the piece, so not incredibly prominent by the time you get this thing assembled and on display. But overall, aside, I call out those nits because I can make those criticisms, but when you step back and look at this thing, the paint is a strength of the piece. I think it looks beautiful. All of those nits just fade into the background, really, when you look at this thing as a whole, and give it credit for the many, many strengths that I already mentioned of the paint application. So I'm super happy with the paint application. Again, it's the litmus test for whether an Imaginarium art statue is going to, frankly, be one of the best or terrible if they don't get that right. And on this piece, I think they really, really nailed it. And is a big reason why this piece is so visually striking and beautiful. Now, I will caveat that in that I did have a paint quality issue. It was literally like the last thing I found as I was taking all these pictures. I almost didn't notice it because it's an overspray issue with some gold bleeding into some silver, but it's a big bleed. Actually, there's gold on the neck crevice and up onto the lip of the shoulder that should not be there. Now with Imaginarium Art, I've bought 3 of their statues. I have had significant paint quality issues with 2 of them. Big finger smudge on my Optimus Prime. You can go back and check that video out. And this overspray issue is not insignificant. It should be caught in the factory by someone who's looking for those things. So it's a watch out when you buy an Imaginarium Art statue. You need to inspect it and make sure that the paint is of good quality, the lines where they belong. Now I know Big Bad Toy Store will take care of me on that and we'll get the issue resolved. But it's mainly just a massive inconvenience because I've spent so much time putting this thing together, unboxing it, and now likely, given my last experience with Optimus Prime, I'll need to return this whole dang statue and get a new one to deal with this one paint issue on this single piece. So for that, it's just like super frustrating because it's a headache, and it's 2 out of 3 times with my experiences in Imaginarium Art. So whenever you buy an IA statue, my advice is make sure you're using a good retailer that you know, you trust, has a return policy that if there's defects like that, they're going to take care of you and get that fixed. And Big Bad Toy Store always does that in my experience. So there you have it, guys. Imaginarium Art Transformers G1 inspired Grimlock Diorama statue. I want to end on a high note. I love the piece. I do. I'll deal with the paint issue, the quality issue. I'll get that taken care of. And when that's resolved and I've got that thing up on display, Grimlock in Dino mode, that big Transformers movie fight scene with the sharkticons and Wheelie helping them out, I think it's awesome. It's a great design, a great callback to the source material. The sculpt is good and satisfies the design perfectly for what they're trying to accomplish. And I think the paint as a whole is very, very good. It's excellent where it matters most. So I'm really excited to have it. Again, check me out on Instagram, same handle, Dan14Prime. Links down in the description below. You'll find more of Grimlock out there. Again, look into my profile. If you hung around this long, any like, comment, you can leave on the video. Helps the video and channel out very much. Please subscribe if you're not yet. And there's links down in the description below, Sideshow, Amazon, eBay. Any purchases you make through Amazon and eBay and any in-stock purchases through Sideshow supports the channel at no cost to you, so thank you very much for that as well. Alright guys, thanks for stopping by the Prime Empire. See you next time.